welcome. It's Pauline again from PQW, and here we are with the second session on tools and tips. We just want to explain to you some of my favourite tools, and this time we're going to talk about what I use to cut my bias and make my bias, because bias can be a really attractive feature to add to applique quilts, to add to just a normal quilt, which I'm going to show you some different things that I've done with strips that look like bias. Sometimes you need to cut it on the bias if you need to go around a curve. But if you want to add as a feature on a straight line, you don't need to cut it on the bias, you cut it on the straight grain. So I just want to explain a few different things to you and show you some different things that you can achieve. Just get creative. Think about what else you can do to enhance the pattern you're working with. Like this is something I love making. It's just a little cushion cover, but I wanted to experiment with colour, of course, beautiful plain colours that really are striking. But I wanted to work with a fabric that wasn't a stripe, but it had lines on it. And I thought, I wonder what that will look like if it was cut on the bias. Well, it looks absolutely fabulous. And I believe that fabric there made into bias is really what has highlighted that whole design. So like you might be doing some sort of very simple thing on a quilt that you want to highlight. Think about bias. So I'm going to show you how I cut the fabric on the true bias, because a lot of people, when they're putting bias around a very tight curve, they say to me that they get a lot of puckering and stretching on that inner part of the curve. I want to show you how to achieve that. That puckering on that inner part of the curve can come from when the fabric is not cut on the true bias. One or two threads off the true bias, you can run into trouble. So I want to show you how I cut it, particularly on the bias, how we're going to make this bias, and I'm even going to show you how to make an 1/8 of an inch bias strip. So if you're into really nice, intricate hand applique, like making a flowered wreath, and you want to do really, really fine stems, I want to show you how to make an 1/8 of an inch. Make it very interesting. So that's one thing I want to show you. This little project here, which a lot of people know about, this is a full quilt. We call it Circle Celebrations. But I just found that the bias, instead of going and blanket stitching around the edges like a lot of people would do, I decided to put a different selection of bias strips, different coloured fabrics around those curves. And then to pull the whole design together, I decided that if I ran some bias strips through the blocks, it would give it a lot more interest. Instead of just having the circle sitting there, I just decided to put a little bit of this bias continuing through and coming through to the outer border. This makes it really, really easy, particularly when you're doing a quilt as you go, like we make ours. So with this quilt here, the first thing I did was the quilting. Then I did the applique over the top, put the bias around the top, ran the bias through here, and then just as I started to put it together and I got to the borders, once I got the borders quilted, I then decided where I would need this bias running to run through. So it was a continuation. And like here, it doesn't even match, but it still adds a nice flow to the quilt. So just some little simple hints and tips and ideas that might help you do something a little bit different with some of the things you're working on. This one here, this is where I wanted to do these fans, but I didn't want to turn the edges under. I didn't want to blanket stitch them, so I decided, what if I made some 1/4 inch strips and just laid around the raw edges of that fan? What would that look like? And I was so thrilled with the finished effect. But this is where I did not have to cut the fabric on the bias. I could cut it on the straight grain. I'll just lay this out a bit better for you to see. This was all cut on the straight grain. So remember, if you're going around curves, any fabric you're going to put around a curve, it needs to be cut on the bias. If you're going to do a straight, just cut it on the straight grain. So let's get into showing you how we approach the bias, how we cut it. I'll show you a few of the tools that I like to use. You may have these, you may not have these, you may choose to use something else, but I'll show you what I use. To cut my bias, I use the Bias-Sasher ruler, this ruler here. Very important, because I want to make sure that both edges of my fabric are on the true bias. When I lay the fabric out and start to cut, I'll explain a lot more about this ruler, but that's the ruler that I would suggest you have for cutting your bias. I'm going to use the little rotary cutter this time, the mini cutter. I'm going to explain why I use this one this time. In the first episode, I used the 45mm cutter. This time I'm using the 18mm cutter, so you'll understand the difference in what the blade does. I'm going to use the 1/4" sasher tool, this one here, to make the strips. Then when I make the 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to use the 1/8 of an inch. Show you how to make fabric stems so very fine using this tool. Then I'm going to use the Roxanne Glue-Baste-It to put the bias down wherever I want it to go. So I'll be using this glue, and I have my fabric. And I'm going to use the rotating mat that I used in episode 1 just to show you how it can be a benefit to you for cutting this bias. But I've just got a fat 1/4 here because I don't want to make a lot of bias, so just a piece of fabric equivalent to about a fat 1/4. I would normally press all of the creases out of here. Just turn my iron on. But what I do next is, a lot of people use their normal big long ruler, and most of long rulers have a 45-degree angle on it, and you would normally lay the 45-degree angle on this edge of the fabric and you would cut through. But a lot of times you may not be laying on the 45-degree exactly here, and this is where we can get into trouble. So this is why I'm going to introduce you to the Bias-Sasher ruler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, cut off a corner so that I get the true bias edge. So on this ruler, I'll just explain this a little bit to you. You can see that we've got 45-degree angles running in both directions. Now, I haven't seen any other rulers out there. They may be there, but I have not seen them that have the 45-degree going both ways. So we're going to put one of these 45-degree angles on one side of the fabric, the other 45-degree angle on this side of the fabric. So just simply turn the ruler around. We'll come to this edge and this edge. Now we can see, and of course you need to have your edge cut straight first, so do that trim up first. We're going to lay this line exactly on the edge of the fabric. Then the same mirror imaged line on this side is going to lay on this edge of the fabric. So now we're going to hold our hand on there. We're going to use the little 18mm blade and we're going to cut through. Now I'm using the little blade because a lot of times when we use the bigger blades, and do watch what you're doing when you're using a 45 or a 60mm blade, as you cut through you can often see your fabric walking ahead of the blade. So the bigger the blade, the bigger the rotation, and we can create distortion from those bigger blades when we're doing this sort of thing. So whenever I'm cutting on the bias or cutting straight strips of fabric, and lots of them and want them to stay exactly even, I use the 18mm blade. Just a little tip. So now we've cut this off. We can cut bias out of that. Don't waste it. You can use that up for your small pieces. I could now lay this on here and I'm going to cut 1/2 inch strips. I could lay this 45-degree angle on this ruler across this edge at the top, but it's not lining up on this edge. The ruler is too short. So what I like to do, we've got the straight edge, and our bias cut. I'm now going to pick this straight edge up and take it to that straight edge. So just fold it up straight edge to straight edge. This is our bias. So turn it around. So now when I put this ruler on here, I'm going to have this 45-degree angle running along both straight edges. I'm going to bring it back to my 1/2-inch line. So long as that line, so long as these edges are folded, let me just fold this over so they're exactly right. Sometimes I press it if I'm working on a big piece, but when I press it, I don't want to stretch it. I just want to literally press. Press. I won't put that iron on because I've got my mat underneath, but you just lightly press. Don't iron because you don't want to stretch that. So lay our 45-degree angle of the ruler exactly so it's laying along this edge. You know, you might have to do this folding a couple of times to get the gist of what you're actually doing. I find when I explain it in classes, on a hands-on class, I have to do it a couple of times to let people understand how to fold the fabric. So now all I'm going to do is cut my strips. And you can just stand there, line up your 45-degree angle, line up your measurement on this edge, your 45-degree angle there, and keep cutting. Now, if I was on a bigger piece of fabric, if I had a much bigger piece of fabric, I could fold again. So now I could cut through 4 layers of fabric. Remember, this edge here is your bias edge. This edge here is your straight edge. So still the same. I can still see that the 45-degree angle is laying on this line. I've now got a nice short cut, and a short cut is an accurate cut. And you can just keep working along and cutting through all of those layers. So if I was cutting this whole piece up, as I work through, and I'm just going to explain this, as I kept cutting and kept lining up this ruler on this edge, when I get up to this corner here and want to keep cutting bias off here, you can now see that this 45-degree angle coming back this way is now keeping me aligned. But I would need to rotate the mat and keep working back this way so that I'm cutting on the right side of the fabric. So you just keep working with the straight edge on the 45-degree angle. And that's just a really good tip, I feel, that helps a lot of people get a really good result with making their bias or cutting their bias the right way. Now, another little tip, which it was something that I had to learn the hard way. When I was making bias one day, because when we use the Sasher tool, the rule of thumb that we work with is whatever this measurement is on the top of the tool, you cut your fabric double that measurement, because the tool is going to fold the edges back in on both sides, so you have no raw edges. But one day when I was working on a project, I was cutting my fabric exactly the 1/2 inch, doing just exactly what I showed you. But when it was coming through the tool, it wasn't folding under properly. It just wouldn't fold under. And I'm thinking, what is going wrong? What am I doing wrong? And I kept making strips for quite some time and it just wouldn't work. And then the penny dropped. What was happening, because what I did next to find the solution was I cut a strip of fabric 1/2 inch wide. Once I'd cut it, I then put the iron on it. So remember, this is my ironing mat on my table, so I'm not ironing directly onto the table. Put the iron on it and then remeasure it. Now that piece of fabric has not shrunk, but a lot of fabrics, this is a batik, this is very tightly woven. The fabric I was using when it was shrinking on me was a more loosely woven fabric, just a regular cotton fabric. And every time I put the iron on it, it shrank a little bit more. So it just told me then that we have to be cautious of what fabric we're using. So if you do a test piece, and let's say you ironed this, pressed it, and it shrunk, cut it that much bigger to what the shrinkage was. So if it shrunk a 1/16 of an inch, cut it a 1/16 of an inch bigger. And you can do that with the ruler. Just pull this back over here. So still align up your line. And I don't know whether the camera is going to pick this up, but if I was cutting this a little bit bigger, I've got a little bit of the navy fabric outside that 1/2 inch line. Just a fraction that will then allow me to get that perfect fold on the fabric. But you only need to do that if you do a test and your fabric shrinks. So I think that's a really helpful hint for a lot of people, because I'm getting inquiries. When I go to the shows, people say to me, but I couldn't get it to work. It wouldn't work. My fabric wouldn't fold over properly. And when I explain the thing about the shrinkage, it makes a lot of sense. So just keep that little tip in mind. And that's what this series is all about, is a lot of times we say, what are we doing wrong? A lot of times it's not what we're doing wrong. We have to find out the solution of why it's going wrong. So that's a really good tip. Now, to make our bias, we'll just get this mat out of the road. We've got our piece of fabric. It's nice and straight, because when you fold your fabric in the first session of this, I showed you how to fold your fabric properly so you don't get those dog legs. So go back and watch that if you haven't already watched it. We're going to fold our fabric in and in till both edges meet. Now, at this little point here, it's a bit tricky to do that because it's very, very small. So if one layer overlays the other, it doesn't really matter. What we're going to do is just press this, and press about the first, good 3/4 of an inch. But if that's not exactly straight, don't worry, that will be a little bit of waste, but it'll allow you to get it into the tool. Now, when we use our regular sashes, now these ones are in the fluoro yellowy greeny colour, but we've now changed them to be all different colours, just purely because other people are pirating our patent and copying it. So we now change colours. The 1/4 inch in the fluoro is now in the blue. The 1/8 of an inch is in a blue. So those two in the set would be for your bias. There's no right or wrong side. But when we use all of these other sizes, when we fold the fabric and put it into the tool, we always put it into the tool with the folded edge facing up to us. But I find with the 1/4 and the 1/8, we need the folded edge facing down onto the ironing surface. Purely, it's such a small fold that if I have it up, it doesn't hold itself. So we're going to have the folded edge facing down to the ironing surface. We're going to come up through from the bottom, back down, and through that hole. You may need a poker. I've used an awl here, but in the next series, I'm going to introduce you to this one. I've just got this one. I'm loving it. I'm going to show you some uses for that. So now we've got that folded. We're going to now put this on our ironing surface, and you'd probably be working on your normal ironing board at home. We showed you the double fork pins in the last session. I'm going to now use one of those pins, because what we need to do is we need to put equal tension on both sides of that fabric. I find if I put one pin in this side, or just one pin in the middle, or one pin this side and one pin that side, I'm not getting exact equal tension on both sides, and one side of the strip can stretch more than the other. Remember, we're on the bias. We need to treat it with caution. Using the double pin, it goes in either side and puts equal tension on both sides because it's going in together. Hold your fabric, and I put my fingers underneath the fabric so it's off the ironing board a little bit. put the side of the iron against the tool and you just simply press. Now, you're not pressing down, you're sliding through. You're just pushing the iron as you slide it through. Go back over it a few times because you need to get enough heat into it to hold that fold. You can see how it's coming through for me. So once you get that done, like after you've done, it started to run off here. I don't know if you can see that. That's because I was losing the pressure point and my fabric was moving. So I should have moved the pin about every 10 to 12 inches to keep the pressure on this so this part of the fabric doesn't move too much. So that's just another little hint. So now we've got this done. So you could go through, I don't advise making a lot of bias at once because it can spring open. It can spring open, particularly if the weather's a bit humid or a little bit sticky, it could pop open on you. So probably make 2 or 3 strips, glue them down, go and make another 2 or 3 strips. You can cut it all at once, but remember, do your tests first. Now I've got this little sample here where I want to put some bias around these petals. So let's say it's an applique and I want to put some, and I may have other colours in here, but I'm just going to put bias down so that you know how to do the bias. I'm going to use the Roxanne Glue-Baste-It and I'm just going to put little tiny dots of glue along. Oops, that's a little bit too much. Going to put that there. I'm going to get a nice edge here, get rid of that little bit of waste. Remember, it wasn't folded over quite perfectly at that end. So we're going to now lay this down, and as we're laying it down, just press it with the iron. That holds it in place beautifully. You know, if you make a mistake with this beautiful glue, if you don't know about the Roxanne Glue-Baste-It, this is an applicator I designed for Colonial needles so that we have got a double-ended applicator, and I'll show you the other end in a moment. But I like to use this little end for things, fine details like I'm doing now. They do have other bottles, but I find the long neck nozzle clogs up a lot and I used to get frustrated with it, so this one doesn't clog on me, which is really nice. But it is water-based glue. I can, if I accidentally have glue and I put my iron on top of the glue, it does not stick to my iron. If I make a mistake here, I can easily pull it back. And if you've got a little bit of glue there, you can get a damp cloth and dampen it down and the glue dissolves, which is really, really nice. So I'm going to have to re-glue this little bit. So I'm only going up close to that tip. Then we'll iron up through here. Now I want to do a little mitre here to come around this nice sharp point. So what I'm going to do is get my glue and I'm going to put some glue on an angle. Now that angle there that I'm putting the glue on is following this petal design. Then I'm going to use this little stiletto, and I love it because it's got double fingers on it, so I can really hold it nicely. This one's great when I'm piecing through the machine and everything, but I find for this it's a little bit tricky. When I found this one, I went, yay, this is perfect. We are going to be selling these, but we're taking pre-orders on them. So you can hop on our website, pre-order, done, and we'll ship it to you as soon as we get them in. Because I didn't know that I'd like it, but I absolutely love it. So just hold your stiletto there, and we're going to fold back onto a 45-degree angle. And you get an absolutely perfect mitre. Then we continue down with our glue. Now I would continue, if I had a long enough piece of bias, I would continue over to the next piece and just continue. But if we have to join at any area, I'm going to show you how to do that too. So we're going to glue this down. Right. So I don't have enough to go around this next one, and I don't want to put a join just a little bit away from the corner. So I'm just going to nip this off here. Okay. Now to do the next section, I'll get another piece. This is where we've just laid down the last piece. I've got a little bit of excess glue there, but it just rolls off. See how I haven't glued down this side? I only just put it right on this side. I'm going to lift this up. Just get some glue here first. Glue up to this point. Lift this up with the stiletto. Fold it back down. Put a little bit of glue under here. Like a lot of people saying, oh, gluing, but by gosh, it's really brilliant. So we just keep going. So now I can come back and put a little bit more glue underneath this area. And like a bottle of glue will last you for so long. But I call it my best friend. Love it. So we've got the point again. So we'll put, just it's not stuck right to there. A little bit of glue on this next direction angle. Hold. And fold back. And the stiletto is great because it's got a really sharp point this side and a blunt point this side. So I can hold with that sharp point while I put the iron on it. And it just holds it there perfectly for me. So now I can continue down. Of course, once I get all of this done, I'm going to put a circle in the center, and I would glue that circle down, and then I'd put a little bit of bias around that circle. Or, you know, you could do a much bigger circle in there. Sky's the limit. You can do anything with bias. It really enhances your design beautifully. So let's make an 1/8 of an inch, because that's really tricky. So if I put a circle around here and it was small, I could make an 1/8 of an inch and put around that circle. The 1/8 of an inch is a little bit harder to stitch down because there's not a lot under the foot of the machine. I always stitch down with the machine. Like with this, I could hand stitch it if I wanted to, but I just don't do a lot of hand stitching these days, haven't got the time. So I go to the machine, I use the open toe foot on the machine, I put the inside edge of the foot right against the edge of the bias, and I move my needle over so the needle's just sitting on the edge of the bias, on the blue. So the foot's on the white, the needle's on the blue. And then as I sew, I watch the edge of the foot. I don't watch the needle. That way I can stitch right on the edge. I'll go around, do the outside edge, then I'll come back and do the inside edge. Now, if I had tacked this down or pinned it down, I would have got a lot of movement as I was stitching, and I probably would have had to have stitched the inside edge first to stop any movement. But gluing it down, it doesn't matter what edge you stitch first. So if you went round the inside there and then come back on the outside, it wouldn't matter, or vice versa. So it really doesn't make a difference. Now with our little 1/8 of an inch, I find to give you the best results with the 1/8 of an inch, cut your fabric 1/2 an inch. Add that little bit of extra if your fabric shrinks. Put your 1/2 inch piece of fabric through the 1/4 inch sasher, as I have here. Then I'm going to refold this in half and put it through the 1/8 of an inch. I find if I just cut my strip of fabric 1/4 of an inch wide and fold both edges in and put it through the 1/8 of an inch, it just looks like a flat bit of fabric. It's not attractive at all. But doing the double fold, it makes it really, really attractive. So we'll fold the edges in as we did before. This is where this little tool uses spiky edge to hold this in place, hold this edge to hold it in place. See, it's my second hand. So now I can press that. Because if I had my fingers there, I'd be burning my fingers. So that little stiletto helps me immensely get that first little fold. Then I'm going to put it through the 1/8 of an inch. And this is the trickiest part, is getting it through that. But once again, use the sharp point to help you guide that through that hole. Poke it on through. We're then going to pin with that double pin into your ironing surface. Pin it well. So you anchor it. Hold it over. Just hold with a little bit. You don't want to stretch it. You want to put a little bit of pressure down with your fingers, but you don't want to stretch it. And you are just going to push with the iron. Let's see if I can pick that up better. And just keep that iron gliding it along. Just take your time. Now it's getting a bit tricky at that end. So if I was to fold this and hold it with this stiletto, just pull it back a little bit so I've got a little bit more room. Fold it over and hold it. Oh, it doesn't want to do its thing. There we go. Just get it nice and even. There we go. And so just take your time with it and get a good result. So there's your little bit of bias. Oops, 1/8 of an inch bias made perfectly. So for those, a lot of people don't want to go to this sort of intricacy, but I love it because, like I could put this here. I could do really fine detail. Ruler, if you're a dressmaker, anything like that, you'll be able to use this for all sorts of things. You just have to be patient making 1/8 of an inch bias. Remember the tip. Make sure your fabric's cut on the true bias by using the 245-degree angles. Make sure that your fabric doesn't shrink when you put the hot iron on it after you've cut it on the bias. Fold your ends in, make sure that the folded edge is facing your ironing surface for the 1/4 inch, otherwise it won't fold under properly. Add it to anything that you want to and get a fabulous result. There's not a pattern for this, sorry, but you could create something like this very, very simply by just cutting, like these are basically a clamshell shape. If you've got I think it's set C quilting templates, there's a clamshell on that. You could use that to get these shapes, and then you could add some bias to it. Makes it perfect, okay? One other little thing that I want to introduce you to, not only that we're going to be stocking this stiletto, we're also going to be, because I know that a lot of people ask me this question when I'm out there and about, because I love my Roxanne glue, as I've told you before. So many people ask me, can you refill this? Yes, you can. So we're going to be stocking the refill bottles. Now, I thought, now can I use this instead of this applicator so that I didn't have to have this? I don't think I will, because this nozzle is way too thick. So it's going to put out too much glue. So it is designed as a refill. So if we're going to refill this bottle, sorry, I've got one here that's nearly empty. We'll use this one. If we're going to refill this one, come to the big end. Now this big end has got a big sponge on it. So when I'm doing big appliques, because I don't use the fusible web underneath my appliques, I use the glue because I don't want stiffness under my appliques. I use this end to spread the glue out wide when I'm putting the glue down. So for example, if I was going to be gluing something, a big applique shape onto here, I would use the sponge. So you can see how it puts out a lot more glue and I can just run it along and sponge it out further. Or, as we did before, we use the little nozzle and we just put little dots. So that's the difference in the applicator. So when I want to refill my bottle, I'm just simply taking the top off. Now, very gently, we want to remove this sponge. Don't just rip it out, because you don't want to rip it and put a hole in it because the glue would leak out. So it's a little knob. Take that out. Just put this aside. Then with your bottle, refill. So you get a lot of refills out of this one bottle and you can still continue to use your applicator. So we're going to be stocking these. Once again, you can pre-order. We don't have it in stock yet. We're waiting for it to come, but you can put a pre-order in for it and we can ship it out to you. Buy a bottle of this and a bottle of this at the same time. Now you've got enough glue to do you for a very, very long time. And if you're following me on the Exquisite Quilt program, which, remember, it's a free online lesson where I'm teaching you my control quilting technique and my quilt as you go technique, you will be using a lot of glue. And anything you do with me, every single quilt I make, I use the glue. So those two things are going to be new products that we're going to be stocking real soon. So that's about all I've got for you for this session. In the next session, I'm going to talk rulers and accurate cutting. We went over the folding in the first series, but I'm just going to explain a little bit about different rulers and why I like them. And I'm going to show you some other products that I love to use too. So it'll be a bit of I'm not going to actually be making something or demonstrating something like I've just done now. I'm just going to be talking to you about how to use a selection of tools the way I use them and why I love to use them and the results I can get from them. So go to our website, www.pqw.com.au. Have a look around. Love you to join us on Facebook, and I'd love you to join us on our Instagram. And I'd also encourage you to hop on to our YouTube channel and have a look at all the lessons that we've got up there for you. But till we meet you next time, we'll say bye for now.